The Gospel of Gold by G.S. Lewis. Just as Silver reached the wall and seemed to pass through it, Gold jolted awake. He sat up on his prison bench, feeling truly wakeful this time, for he was conscious of all his senses. When he had seen Silver in Kammen's human body, the cell looked much the same as now. However, his sensory inputs had felt mostly muted, like being suspended in water. Silver was gone, if he had ever been there in the first place, but the shaking was not. Gold had never before experienced an earthquake. The closest thing he could compare it to was back in second grade when he had hit a girl over something. He didn't remember what, but he did recall the immense anger of his father. When he'd found out, the man had picked him up and actually shaken him hard. Afterward, father and son made up, and both apologized for their wrongdoing. Still, the memory of the shaking had lasted in Gold's mind, the feeling of helpless fright in the grip of power and wrath. That was how it felt now. At first, the vibrations were merely unpleasant and disorienting, but they threatened a promise of something worse to come. Sure enough, the rumbling began in earnest from all around, numbing Gold's legs and drowning his eardrums in its uproar. A sudden, sharp crack rent the air, louder even than the earthquake, and Gold covered his head instinctively. Though his eyes watered with pain, he looked in the direction of the noise that had nearly deafened him. The wall had split open. It wasn't wide enough a crack for him to fit through, at least on the bottom, but it led directly out into the free night air. Such was the placement of his cell, and since this was a holding station and not an actual prison complex, there was not likely to be a serious border surrounding and reinforcing the place. The underfoot convulsions continued at full strength, making it nearly impossible for Gold to muster anything but the most rudimentary of thoughts. But the question occurred to him now. Could I escape? Should I escape? If he took advantage of this unanticipated opportunity and fled now, he would likely be held accountable later. The authorities knew his face, his father, his hometown, and when they had re-established order, they would find him again. To stay would be a show of good faith, one that declared his innocence even to the corrupt. Gold yelped and scuttled backward in fright as a chunk of the ceiling plunged down right next to him, shattering a few 100 pounds of cement on the floor. "Forget this! Staying is suicide!" In full panic mode, he leapt for the crevice in the wall, grasping protruding lengths of twisted rebar and praying that he wouldn't be shaken off. He scrambled up the rough climb, faster than he had ever gone in his life, hardly feeling the rough cuts and scratches opening on his hands. He was getting away from here. He was innocent and didn't belong in this place to begin with. The League had just put him there, and the rockets would keep him there. If he could just make it home to Ekrutik, just one city away now, surely they would shelter him and challenge this whole mad state of affairs. All at once, his head lit up with excruciating pain. It was so sudden, so overwhelming, that it took his focus away from everything else. He forgot his situation, the earthquake, and even the fact that he was now standing on the very top of the wall, precariously straddling over a 10-foot drop. His skull might as well have been caught in a vice. Gold didn't realize he was falling until he hit the ground, and even then, having the wind knocked out of him only slightly distracted from the utter agony that ravaged his head. He pressed his hands violently to the sides of his temples, refusing to let go, not even to pick himself off the ground. Somehow, he managed to untangle his legs beneath him and stumble to his feet without the help of his upper body. The tremors of the earthquake sent him sprawling a second time, but he rose again, subconsciously, and ran.
Let me in!
The voice of Silver came to him, both in the earthquake and in his head. They were two in one, and neither less brutal than the other. As Gold panted and cried and suffered and struggled blindly forward, Silver's presence fell upon him, like the shadow of a predatory bird. Never before had Gold felt his malice to this extent, and never had he seemed so strong. This time, it truly felt like Silver was exerting his fullest effort to pin Gold down and smother him to death with sheer pain. Vaguely, he sensed that his nose was bleeding.
Let me in, damn you!
I can't take this. The cognition was not a conscious thought, but an impression upon his soul in that moment. In his unthinking state, Gold conceived an earnest appreciation for the magnitude by which he was outmatched. There was no comparison. By rights, he should have been rendered helpless already. The ongoing earthquake had turned his legs to jelly, and the psychic assault on his mind pressed relentlessly. Blindness. Then only pain. Then nothing. Gold opened his eyes to a cloudy sky overhead. He was on his back, and something heavy covered the entirety of his body. What it was, he could not tell at first, but it was warm and comfortable. However, when he tried to move, he found that his arms and legs could not even budge under the substance. It was finer than powder, but its sheer weight made him wonder how he was not being smothered, or at least aching from the pressure. The white stuff exuded an aroma that struck Gold as starkly familiar. Indeed, it might have been the first thing he had ever smelled in his life. Ashes. I'm on a bed of ashes.